Very honored to have Houten with us. He's been working on pedestrian safety issues for 35 years. That's a long time. And just a few words about Ron. In fact, I first met him, I was at some TRB meeting, and there was a room that I went by, and it was just standing room only, and people were just congregating outside trying to hear what was going on. And so I just had to hear what was happening too, so I sort of weaseled my way in there to listen to him. He's just this year at TRB won the Pat Waller Award from the Systems and Safety Division of TRB. He's been a past chair of the Transportation Research Board Pedestrian Committee. He's organized the program on pedestrians for TRB for the last 15 years. And we are very fortunate that he's here in town because the National Committee on MUTCD, the Manual for Uniform Traffic Control Devices, that basically controls what you see on traffic signs all over the country. They're meeting here in Minneapolis this week. Today's the last day, and we kind of were able to talk Ron into coming here and sharing some of his wisdom with us. So anyway, without further ado, Ron Van Houten.
Thank you, Max. I've been to Minneapolis before, and I love the city. And to punish us, to make sure we work hard at the National Committee, they're having us. They keep us at the airport at a hotel to do the National Committee. So it's, it's not the best place to be, not the best venue, but I guess they figure there's fewer distractions there. So that's where they keep us. And maybe a basement somewhere, that would work.
That's the Ramada.
Anyway, I thought I'd start by this little, it's interesting because it shows pedestrians, and you never know what can happen in life. But anyway, you have cameras everywhere. This is interesting. We have a bicyclist going across in the crosswalk. You're going to watch the bicyclist go. And you'll see a few pedestrians, and they'll be over here, and they're going to start to cross. And this is an interesting one. Let's gotta have something interesting to start with. It never looks as good on the other screen, but here you have the traffic. The bicyclist, he's clear, he got across the street. And look at that red light runner that's so lucky, that thread between those moving vehicles. And those pedestrians are looking and saying, what was that? Just think, if the timing was off, just a little bit, the bicyclist would be dead. If the timing was off a little bit, again, the pedestrians, and I think they've got a stroller there too, they'd be dead, just like that. And remarkably, that driver isn't dead. I'll show it again, because pieces do come off the side of his car as he's weaving between moving vehicles. I mean, he isn't weaving, he's going straight, but they're moving, and he just threaded the perfect path. So sometimes you can't count on dumb luck, right? Just watch that car go through you. Now you know what you're looking for. Watch it. Look at that, right between. And you see there was an impact, and he keeps going. So we got to deal sometimes with things going on the roadway we have no control over. We've got to make it as safe as we possibly can for pedestrians and bicyclists because, you never know what people are going to do. How do you protect against everything? Well, you can't protect against everything. When people talk about zero tolerance now, we're hearing that about pedestrians and, but dealing with everything, it's something to work on. Okay. Many people say that pedestrian safety is a shared responsibility. I used to hear this a lot. And this slide speaks for itself. I give this talk sometimes to police officers and do a little bit of that, some training. To drive, you need to demonstrate a high level of skill. Pedestrians, including children, people with disabilities, mental disabilities, seniors, sometimes no longer can drive, and the driver has the weapon. So you can't trade this down to the pedestrian and say, hey, it's all equal, because it's not all equal. And when you drive the car, you have a higher responsibility than when you're walking. Anybody can walk. Not everybody can drive a car. Certainly we wouldn't want these two here driving a car. And she couldn't drive a car anymore. She's blind. She can't drive a car either. Right? I sometimes have given workshops and shown that compliance for blind is no better than for anybody else. Safety assessments. They begin with examination of crash reports. At site exam, you examine conflicts or incidents. What is unsafe and what would be safe behavior that could replace it. And then you examine those and relate it to crash type. And then you look for countermeasures that could make a difference. And there are some special concerns in pedestrian safety. One of the special concerns, am I loud enough and the amplification's working good, I hope? Good. Okay. I've got a cold, as you can hear, and my voice isn't good. Screening crashes, the danger of mid-block multi-lanes. I mean, hey, if you have two parked cars, what should you do when you want to enter the street in between two parked cars? Assuming it's legal to do so. You should stop, right, at the edge and look first. Why not just look? Why not just look? Isn't looking good enough? Well, I live in the past. That's the good answer, right? You live in the past, Dr. Van Houten, and I do sometimes, right? I have a reaction time, all right? So my reaction time is 1 second, and I'm walking at this speed. Whoa, I'm about to be hit. There's nothing I can do about it, right? Well, it's the same thing for what's called a multiple threat crash. Unfortunately, on a multi-lane road, and I'll have diagrams, I'll come back to that, okay? I want to show you this because it's really important. It's one of the big problems I solved years ago, but it took me forever to get it into the manual, and it's taking me forever to get people to realize they can make a difference and do something about this. Turning vehicle A-pillars and things like that, those are screening things too. Sometimes people turning left, they don't have a good view of what's going on. Failure to scan for pedestrians. You know, drivers turning right. You know, they don't look to their right. The cars don't come from the right. You only need to look to the left. Some people think. We've done studies on this. You get looking both ways, but sometimes people don't do enough looking to the right. Well, what are you looking for to the right? A bicyclist or a pedestrian is what you're looking for. And drivers turning left, of course, I mentioned the A-pillar. And of course this, that people realize for the longest time, and it's hard to document a fact like this, but the faster you go, the less likely you are to yield to a pedestrian. Worse than that, you're less likely to see them, because what happens, from a human factors point of view, is the faster you go, the narrower your view, what you see. Okay? Going slow, you see more. So there are a lot of human factors issues that come into play also that we always have to be mindful of if we want to really make a difference. Excuse me. Treatment strategies. From a general generic point of view, one of them is prompting. It's critical for prompting, reminding people to do something, coaching them to do something. It's critical that the location is critical because location affects timing, and timing is the most important variable. In other words, I can remind somebody to do something. If I remind you, I could try to trade off a responsibility to my wife. Remind me I have to do this tomorrow. Now, if I fail to do it, I can blame her, right? She's caught on to that. She doesn't let me get away with that anymore. And the best time to remind is obviously right before you're supposed to do it. If I can time it, if I can do it by location, a clever way of doing it, that's much better. And so prompting should be at the right spot. So if I'm going to step off a curb, maybe a reminder to, well, here in Britain, look right, right? Why do they put those in London? Because they have so many tourists who don't look right and get hit. So you put it where a person's going to see it, maybe right next to something they have to look at. And if you're stepping, usually step down, usually look down so you don't trip. So it might be a good place to put it, right at your feet. There's an interesting story on that. Winston Churchill was visiting New York City before World War II and before he was Prime Minister and before World War II started. And he was almost killed because he looked right and stepped in front of a car. And it was in critical condition. And it's providential because if he had died, maybe World War II might have played out very differently, right? He was a very big player there. But again, it's this kind of situation. It was a traffic pedestrian thing that almost took his life. Feedback affects people's behavior, so we can build feedback systems into our systems. Electronic signs. We can use smartphones. Our countdown timers are an example of that, and they've made a big difference for safety at crosswalks, having the countdown timer. Also, getting more people cleared across the street. Increasing or reducing effort. Humans don't like to put in more effort, and they don't like to wait. So if you want to discourage something, make people wait if they do it that way, or make it more effortful. And if you want to encourage something, make it least effortful, and make the wait shorter. All right? If you want someone to do something, they'll pick the option that will be quickest, all other things equal. We've done a lot of this. One of the studies I'm doing now is working with vehicles and pedal resistance, accelerated pedal resistance. So let's say you're not wearing your seatbelt. And you hit, that's fine, you don't have to wear your seatbelt. But at 15 miles an hour, if you're not wearing your seatbelt, instead of a couple of pounds force on the accelerator pedal to travel at any speed, now to maintain or travel, accelerate, you have to apply 35 pounds of pressure. They buckle their seatbelts real fast. They learn to buckle their seatbelts. We get 100% seatbelt use. We've done the same thing for speed, same device. It's like a footrest. If you're so much over the speed limit, you now have to push harder. And it discourages speeding. So effort's big. Time. Once I did this study years ago. It had the largest effect size for energy conservation. It was an elevator study. I wanted people to use the stairs at the university. I used feedback, I used prompts, and it got no effect at all, telling them it was healthy to walk, use the stairs. I told them it saved energy because it was during an energy crisis, and it had no effect. Increased the door delay duration, and everybody's going to the stairs. Huge effect size, except for those who needed to use the elevator. So all those things, incentive systems, I'm not going to talk about all of them because I don't really have time. I want to get on to more specific things about pedestrians, and so I'm going to move on a little bit. Traffic signals. Some of the things we've looked at are advanced on offset stop bars. Charlie Zagier did a lot of work on the offset stop bars. I did one on moving them back. And what we found was it improved safety and also improved vehicle safety because without it added 3/4 of a second to the clearance, right? By moving them back. Oh, of course, within range. There are certain parameters about that, which I'm not going to get into again. Hot buttons. And I'll go into this stuff in a minute. That's another thing we can do. Wait time again. Buttons that confirm the press. Hey, like, is this working? Sometimes they don't work. In New York City, there's a whole bunch. You don't have to push them, really. Don't do anything, but they're there. Wide turning radii and wide lanes, countdown signals. They're bad, by the way, wide turning radii. And signs that prompt drivers of turning vehicles to look, all those kinds of things. And maybe smart applications might even get better in the future. Where do you look, by the way? One of the things I looked at early on is where the crashes are happening. You have with right and left turning vehicles at signalized intersections. And you look at the serious crashes, they mostly involve the left turning vehicles. And the reason for that is obviously they carry more energy because they have a wider turning radius. And so you've got the velocity is up and the square of the velocity, you have more energy to absorb. And pedestrians are not good at absorbing energy. So, this is one of the things. And of course, where do you have to look? And we discovered where the crashes happen. This is really interesting. You can cross at a crosswalk in a clockwise direction or in a counterclockwise direction. You understand that. It's either clockwise or counterclockwise. And you encounter the threats differently if you cross clockwise or counterclockwise. You cross clockwise, the first thing you have to look for is a right on red, and then you have to look for a left on green. But the left on green, although you have right of way, you should still look because they can kill you, right? So, is behind you. It's coming from behind you, and they're looking there for a gap in traffic sometimes. And then ahead of you is a right on green. But if you're going in the counterclockwise direction, your first threat comes from behind you, and it's a right on green. Your left on green is now coming from ahead of you, and your right on red is still beside you. It's the least energy. To get hit by it usually isn't serious unless it's a truck. And so, again, most pedestrians don't realize where do you have to look. We train pedestrians, look left, right, left kind of thing, but you really have to be more specific about that. What are you looking for? And where do you look? Leading pedestrian phase. This is something I did research on and I tried to promote. And some cities have used it. It has less value now than it used to because you can turn right on red. But essentially, by holding the all-red phase, you could have an exclusive pedestrian period. And that can be very short. Why does short work? Well, a 3 or 4 second LPI works because it gives the pedestrian the lead getting into the intersection. Territoriality, you're there first, now you can be seen because you're in the crosswalk, you're not stepping into the crosswalk. There's a certain advantage there. And if we look at conflicts, they really go down. It shouldn't be surprising. For people starting at the start, they go down pretty dramatically because you don't have conflicts. And then, later on in the cycle, you still get some advantage, perhaps, and that may be because territoriality, the pedestrians are now out there, and that's part of the advantage. But this is an interesting one. It's like taking a lead in baseball. Once the LPI has been in for a while, the pedestrians, this is a downtown area where you have many similar users every day, they're starting to pick up on the fact, and they're getting through more lanes because they got an idea that I actually have a lead here. So they're going a little faster. I mentioned turning radii, and this is an interesting one here. Watch the person in red. This is just an example of a conflict, that's all. I'm not going to show you a messy one where someone gets hit. But right there, whoa, out of the way. Car slows, he goes fast. That's what we call a traffic conflict for it involves an evasive maneuver. Actually, both the vehicle and the pedestrian took an evasive maneuver because they were closing. And as you know, Tarek Sayad is now doing research on this kind of thing and has got beautiful methods of automating this whole thing, this data collection of conflicts, and actually can get time to crash at the point that they take the evasive action. So we can see how close the call actually was, and it's not scored by human observers anymore, it's scored by a computer that's looking at the trajectories. So that's something else that we can do, and of course one of the problems with the way some of the cities like Florida that have high pedestrian crash levels is they built their cities to move vehicles with these wide turning radii, and everybody's going fast, and you have lots of problems that come out of it. The older cities have tight turning radii, and so you're reducing the energy, you're reducing the speeds, and you're doing good things there. And you know, modern really is, hey, let's go fast, make it wide. But that's not good for walking, it's not good for bicyclists, it's not good for other road users, it's only good for cars. And that's making us unhealthy, among other things. Oh, single eyes. This is a cute thing I did years ago. I had data showing we reduce conflicts and increase looking by having eyes that look back and forth at the top of the... And that's in the manual, actually, but nobody's using it because the countdowns came out around the same time. And the countdowns sort of preempted it. They're an even better idea. I always thought for people talk about educating kids, putting them at crosswalks where kids cross, even though you have crossing guards. Hey, what are the eyes about? What do we have to do, kids? We need to keep looking and make that part of the education thing. Because I think you can get complacent, and you see people complacently crossing the street, not looking for turning vehicles. And yeah, most of the time there won't be one there, and usually the driver may be seeing you. But when they don't, that's when people get hit. And they do get hit. And even buses hit people this way. And when they hit people this way, they kill them almost every time, right? With these turns. We had one recently I was looking at, and everybody saw the pedestrian but the bus driver in the bus. And they saw it coming. But it happens, and when it does happen, it's a sad thing. All right, so the countdowns, a friend of mine, Louis Malafont, and I, we do research together. He was a graduate student of mine. Many, many years ago, talked to a Canadian company about timing the amount of time before the signal changes. Not how much you have for the walk. We said, well, how much time do you have to wait when you push the button? And the guy thought it was a great idea, and he left. And a year later, he started making countdown timers, but he didn't count down what we suggested. He counted down how much time was left in the walk. It was a Canadian company that did that, actually, Max. And that started it. And once pedestrians saw this, this was unstoppable. I can say a lot more on this, but I may not have time today because I've done some work on this recently. And we do know that there's a safety benefit to the countdown timers. Really is. Yes, if you consider starting during the flashing hand a violation, it increases them. But if you consider the serious violation still being in the street, at the end, it decreases that dramatically. And it clears more people, which means you have fewer people who might violate later. Because they think, oh, maybe I can cross now, even though I shouldn't. Okay, hot buttons. I'm going to go quick on this. There's a lot of reasons why people might not cross a dangerous street. And these are some of those reasons. Gap size, vehicle speed, crosswalk length, number of lanes, blah, blah, blah. And I can talk about some other weather-related factors that influence people's decisions. But the important thing we discovered in this one of the studies we did is that people will only wait so long, and they'll start to take risks. The more dangerous the road, the longer they'll wait. Right? But they will start to violate at some point. How can you decrease violations? Well, it's like everything else. If you're waiting in a line, you hate it. Everyone hates waiting. Listening to music, eating, looking at flowers, looking at other interesting things that are going on. I had a friend of mine who was a psychologist, and years ago he had this idea. He did. This is before anybody else did it. It was his idea. Hey, all these kids in restaurants, why don't we give the kids crayons and a placemat they can color? And he did a study on it and published it, actually. And that, you know the rest. They're still probably using that in some restaurants. They give them something to do. Give people something to do, they're less likely to violate or do something else. And here's what we found. We found this in a number of crosswalks. If you had to wait 30 seconds, you get really good compliance from pedestrians. And the minute you start to get violations start to become significant at a 2-minute wait. So the longer you have pedestrians wait, the more likely they'll be to violate. And you can say, well, we need to beef up the enforcement. But an alternative would say, hey, can't we fix it so they don't have to wait so long? Oh, yeah, but what about the drivers and progression? And they'll start talking about those things. But again, if you want people in downtown to walk, maybe you need to make it more convenient. The study we did in Miami for federal highways, it was a 3-city thing. We did the Miami piece. And we looked at GIS mapping of all the crashes. We picked South Beach, not because we just wanted to keep going back there, which we did many times, but because there were a lot of crashes. It was the hottest spot, really. And we could see what they were, and they were very different patterns. These are seniors who live along here being hit. These are young people, and a lot of people are being hit here, but they weren't serious crashes because they're crawling on Ocean Avenue, right? So essentially, we had an ITSA project first that I was part of. We did some enforcement, and we got some change. But we put in a multifaceted program that involved a lot of good engineering, too, that was targeted to why the crashes were occurring. We got some really nice reductions in the number of pedestrians struck, and that was significant, that change. All right, reducing screening crashes. Advanced stop lines, the RRFB, hybrid beacons, in-street signs can all help reduce those. It is dangerous when cars stop too close, and you can see why, because of the screening crash that I just talked about a moment ago. And an engineer asked me about 30 years ago, we have these multiple threat crashes happening in a system, and how do we prevent them? And I said, well, they're happening because people are yielding too close, right? And looking isn't good enough because, as I showed before, it's not going to help you. Now, if I taught every pedestrian to stop at the edge of a vehicle and stop too close and look, that would work. Okay, it's good to go. Oh, it's not good to go. So that would work. But hey, that's going to be a hard thing to do consistently. So the solution was this. Well, first I put stop lines in. Stop here for pedestrians. And of course they wouldn't do it. Say, this is not a stop situation. That changed, by the way. Now we have states calling it stop laws, and they wouldn't let me do it. So I said, well, let's go with the yield markings. I did study after study, site after site, and it took forever to get it into the manual. And most of the sites that I did, we had stop controlled on the minor street, and we had the multi-lane, and it was at an intersection. I had a couple of mid-blocks, at many, many crossings. So what did they do initially? Said you can only use it at mid-blocks. I guess they like to be conservative, but that's not what the data showed. It worked really well at these other locations. Well, obviously, you can see why it would solve the problem, because if you stop further back, I can now see, as I'm crossing, I can see the car coming in the next lane, and they can see me. And I've eliminated the screening problem by doing that. Okay? That's why. In either direction going, wherever they are, when I'm crossing multiple lanes, that's going to reduce the likelihood of this kind of crash. And the data was very good anywhere we did it, and it started to get used all over the country. I took pictures from about every state where I saw them initially. So pleased, finally people are doing them. But I still see people. I've been places, and they put that sign and the marks right at the crosswalk. They now have a treatment that will make things more dangerous, right? And so I don't understand that. Things like that still, but, you know, it's the way the world works sometimes. So conflicts go way, way down. There are the controls, and this is the treatment and follow-up, and this is what happens to conflicts versus what's happening at the control sites. Yielding goes up slightly, and of course stopping distance goes up dramatically when you put those in. And I did a component analysis here. It's different sites, and basically the bottom line is this, that the markings did more of the work than the sign did. But you know something? They were all in a city where we put a whole lot of them in. And so you can't judge much from that. The pedestrian hybrid beacon, are you familiar, everybody, with pedestrian hybrid beacon? It doesn't work so well in a lot of cities. And some states have published some papers on that. And I did a study for MDOT on that. And one of the things we found was, yeah, it doesn't work so well because they don't understand what to do. Why did they understand in Tucson? Because Tucson put a large number of them up, and they had some education, even had a little enforcement. So right from the very beginning. Eventually, you put enough of them up, people will figure it out. But sometimes you try something new, and it's the only one, there are problems. Okay. The in-street sign. Standard application, often used on two-lane roads, installed on the center line, as Kay Fitzpatrick and Sean Turner showed. They're not particularly effective on multi-lane roads. And I did a study for federal highways. I said, well, let's try to find out the sweet spot in terms of distance. Should they be at the crosswalk or in advance? So I tried different positions, counterbalanced the number of sites. And what I found was they were most effective at the crosswalk itself, not before. And if you had 3 in, it was no more effective than 1. This way. I don't know why I thought to even try that, but by the way, I just want to show you. These streets have lots of traffic. You say, oftentimes people, traffic safety researchers show you pictures like this and say, where are the cars? There's no problem crossing the street here. Because we have to wait a long time to get a good picture to show everything, because you can't see anything if you take the picture when all the cars are there, which is much of the time. Anyway. The RFB, I was the lead on doing the original work on the RFB. But one of the things I discovered is that if you had, typically they were putting them on each side of the street. If you had a median and a refuge island and you put them on the median or refuge island, you got a better effect. So there's where you, by adding, you can actually, by making a gateway, right? It seemed to work. I'm going to come back to the gateway because I'm going to do that with in-street signs. All right, so here's the RFB at night. And with that gateway, the yielding goes to about 100%. It's in the 80s and 90s without it. So that is significant because you don't want violations. By the way, I talked about multiple threat crashes. What's the best surrogate for a multiple threat crash on a multi-lane road? The best surrogate measure for a multiple, that'll estimate how likely a multiple threat crash is going to be. Think about it for a second. ADT. The more cars on the road, the more likely there will be a car in the next lane to actually blow through. Here's the RFB. This is an actual, not staged thing. There's a person trying to cross the street standing there, and none of the cars are yielding by the crosswalk. And a woman comes by and says, why don't you just have to push the button here, she tells him. There's the woman in the red coat. Oh, you know, you have to push the button. So she pushes the button for him. The signal comes on. It's not very photogenic, and all the cars stopped. So we got really good compliance with this. But again, like Tucson, we put lots of these up. St. Pete's up to 200 of these right now. They're working on 200. The time we finished our study, it had 33. And We did this in Miami as well. Got very good data in Miami, day and night. And here's 19 sites that we had. We did 2-year follow-up, 730 days here. And we're getting, you know, baselines were zeros. Yielding, this is Florida, yielding 0%, 5%. Read these numbers. 0, 0, 0, 0, 8, 1, 0, 0. That's a percent. 2%, 0, 0, 0. Look at the results here. 83, 80, 96, 78, 95, 88, 83. It's very effective. Looks like an emergency flasher. The original ones we tested did anyway. Kay Fitzpatrick just completed presenting a nice study to the pedestrian committee just the other night. And she's been doing stuff for Federal Highways, has followed up further on this and found out, yes, brightness is important. It can even be too bright at night. But brightness is really important, particularly during the day. Class 1 beacons are really, that level is probably really important. Flash pattern is important, but not the one that, we tested one that the vendor developed, but any one that resembles an emergency flasher will work. All right, that's what she found. And she found something we didn't look at. She looked at if you put it, we put it below the sign. Sign recognition and inclusion is better, and it's better for seeing the pedestrian if you put it just above, at the top of the sign rather than under the sign, which we didn't look at, but that's another variable. So way to go, Kay. Very nice stuff. Yes?
Your compliance rates up there, is that when the system's active, they actually pushed it, or is there a pedestrian?
No, it's when they pushed it. If you don't push the button, it's still quite low. All right? You need to push the button to alert the drivers. We also found they tended to yield further back. So it helped against the multiple thread a little bit, not perfectly. Still, we always put the lines in. We put the marks in typically. In our study, all the marks went in, the advanced yield markings, and they haven't had any. And as far as I know, the last time I asked, there were no crashes at any of these sites, so it's working well. The reason they would yield further back is because they're alerted to what's going on. And because of that, they're more inclined to be able to respond more quickly. And I think one of the reasons people don't yield is they're afraid of a rear-end crash, but everybody's being alerted by the beacon, so they start to slow earlier. Everybody's slowing, and they're also slowing and coming to a stop much further back than they normally would, because they're getting that far-off alerting of what's going on. You didn't talk about how I developed the methodology for this, actually, a long time ago. One of the problems with scoring yielding to pedestrians, all right, here's a car coming right here, and I go like this, he didn't yield. Well, he couldn't. How do we get a good methodology that's solid? We use the signal timing formula, determine where the dilemma zone is, mark the dilemma zone, and the gear vehicle has to be beyond the dilemma zone for us to score them as not yielding. Okay? So that was key to really coming up with a good methodology. Otherwise, this becomes a Rorschach. You can do what you want with it. You know, you're going to count this person, you're going to count that person. You have to have a good, clear definition of when a person should and shouldn't yield, or can and can't yield. Typically, they can if they're inside, often yield. There's a little bit of grace within the formula. But if they're clearly too close, they can't. So we don't bother. We'll count someone as yielding who's inside if they yield. We won't count them as not yielding unless they're beyond the dilemma zone, right, when the person entered the crosswalk. That's an in-street sign on the lane line they were starting to do in Michigan. They were getting some good results with that. And I started saying, wait a minute, why don't we go with that gateway approach? Do something like this. Or this is Livernois. Poor yielding on Livernois. This is in Detroit. This is one half of the roadway, 2 lanes in each direction. What if we put a gateway in like this? Well, what if? This is Baseline on Trowbridge Road. This is at the Michigan State. It's a road near Michigan State, a multi-lane road. Here's one sign, quite variable. Here's a gateway. One sign, gateway, Baseline. One sign, gateway. One sign, baseline, one sign, gateway. The gateway seems to be pretty effective there. At Livernois, it was even better. Here we have Baseline, about a little better than 20-something percent yielding. One sign, Baseline, gateway, Baseline, one sign, and gateway. Because we can take these and put them out and take them in, right? So we can show, like a light switch, hey, this is what's causing the effect. And you can see consistently for the gateway it was quite high, about 80% level. And for the one sign, typical of what K. Fitzpatrick found. And then with nothing, pretty poor, right? We did this a lot of sites, and we found consistency in these results. So what happens when you combine it with things? Here's one where at Livernois, at a site, we had then an pedestrian hybrid beacon, and if you don't activate the beacon, it was, at this site, 0%, and then we had one sign, pedestrian hybrid beacon, not Tucson-like results, is it? And then sign plus a hybrid beacon, and then we have the gateway here compared to the hybrid beacon, and it is at least as effective as the hybrid beacon at this site. Of course, you don't have to push a button for it to work either, which means it's always working. And, okay, we're doing a study now looking at, well, what makes this work? What if we have three? Is it just because there's the narrowing of the road and you're going between these signs? You ever notice this? Do you get better yielding going into a roundabout from people going in than people coming out? When they're going in, they're slowing down and they see a pedestrian. When they're coming out, they're accelerating again and they see a pedestrian. I think that's part of the problem. So one of the things we're going to do is we're going to run the study. We're just putting these in instead of this. We're going to look at both. Go back and forth and see which one works better. Is there a change? Does the sign really make a difference? Also, we looked at delineators. This is not the one we're using. You've heard of the City Post? It's one of the companies makes something called the City Post, and TTI tested it. And it takes 100 hits, and they'll warrant it for 100 hits at 60 miles an hour. So I put this in an urban site, and you're going to hit it usually less than 60 miles an hour. It's going to survive. One of the problems with this, what we're doing here with the R16s, which is that in-street sign, is will they survive? So our big project now is we're putting in large numbers of these, and we're trying quick curb. Have you heard of quick curb? We're using quick curb to mount them onto. Quick curb survives. I have some friends in Florida who liked what I did with this, and they tried some of these in Florida, this gateway, and they're getting good results with it, and they're using quick curb. And they're saying the quick curbs are surviving. Because some people will try to hit these things. They try to. With the quick curb, they'll survive. So that's one way.
Quick curb.
Curb. It's a metal. It's a curb that you put right in. A piece of curb that goes right into the roadway. It'll even survive plows. So we're using quick curb. We're using another proprietary thing another company has. I don't know if it's proprietary, but another company has another way for survival, and we're looking at both of those. And we're looking at City Post, a gateway that's made up of a couple of R16s in the places where they're most survivable in the gutter pan area. And in the lane line, we're putting the City Post, same color. So we still have a gateway. Will that work? We're not sure. But if it does, we know it'll last, because we know the City Post is really robust. Chicago's put a lot of them in, and they hold up. And of course, you can take them out, just unscrew them. They unscrew out. They're flush mount, and you can unscrew them for the winter. But they will warrant them for one winter against plows. That doesn't mean they'll last too long against plows. And in Minnesota, I'll bet they won't last very long against plows. Max and I were talking about it, and I think they might not. But we need to look at it anyway. And I got permission to put them on the curb face as well, because I think they'll survive there even better than the gutter pan. And there's less of a drainage issue. And they'll actually, I don't even know if they'll survive plows on the curb, because they're going to get a lot of snow load hitting them from the plows too. I don't know what will happen there. So we're looking at a whole bunch of variables for that. And here's from Florida, where they're combining them with delineators already for some things. And okay, now the last part of my talk, I'm going to talk about changing treatment package to change to produce a culture change, because that's what we got the Waller Award for. We know that in Florida yielding is not very good, and the question is, can you actually change a culture? So not just at enforcement sites, but at all sites, yielding goes up on a citywide basis. And can you sustain it? We're going back now, and this is having us go back after 3 years and look to see whether it's sustained. The police tell me it is sustained. They say they go out and they can't catch anybody anymore. So we'll see. But we've used enforcement in the past, but without other things. And it hasn't lasted. So, you know, how do you change the culture? That's a problem for bicycle safety. That's a problem for pedestrian safety. How do we produce a culture change? A good package is multifaceted, yeah. A good package is cost efficient, yeah. It ties the components together to generate a synergistic effect. Now, I dislike the fact that people think it's clever. I don't know. We used to say triple E, and they say, I got 4 E's. I invented 5. Let's go to 6. I got 8 E's. Excellent. 9. Engineering, enforcement, and education are the 3 E's that really count. All right? There's 3 still. But people sometimes run off in their own direction with their E's. That is, the person who crafts the education piece, I'm a specialist in that. It doesn't tie into the enforcement piece. And neither of them tie in to the engineering piece. They all need to be coordinated seamlessly to get the synergistic effect you're looking for. Right? So, let's get into this. We had a number of sites. Some were treated, some were untreated. We couldn't measure everywhere in the city. So, before we started, we said, let's make sure we refresh all the markings, because I'm a big proponent of advanced markings. We had advanced markings installed at all of them at the beginning before we recorded baseline before data. Okay? Because we know it can have an effect. So let's do all that first and make sure everything is clean at the beginning of the study. And one of the things I'm not showing here you can do is if you have lane lines in the multi-lane, you can make them solid from the dilemma zone on up to the advanced marking. The beauty of that is for enforcement operations, you don't have to put a cone out. Also discourages, doesn't make it illegal, discourages passing, which is something that you want to do probably. All right. And by the way, even for a hawk, advanced stop bars are important. I mean, in terms of yielding, not so much, but look at where people yield. It's a big difference. Without stop bars, that's the blue. With stop bars is the red. Almost everybody is back, which is what you want them to do. Here's our treatment strategy. Well, first, that's not our beginning part, but here's our treatment strategy. There were 4 2-week enforcement waves over the period of a year. Education and engineering designed to potentiate the enforcement was staggered to attract attention for the media. The media have, they habituate to things very, very quickly. They're there to report news. You've got to give them news. If you've done it once, you do it again, they won't come out to see it the second time. So it has to be something new the second time to get them to keep coming out and get your earned media. We kept going to the front page in the newspaper because we kept doing that. We kept doing things that would attract the attention. So you have to craft the thing. But the first real step is community support. Identify the community groups who can support the program. And it's not the advocates. They're going to be part of that, obviously, but that was a no-brainer. Follow me? The people who are not the advocates need to be supporters. Otherwise, you have advocates against the rest. It's a bad plan. So in the very beginning, we tried to identify everybody we could in the community who could be a supporter so we could add their names to what was going on. We're making it Mom, Apple Pie, and Early Spring. It's hard to fight it. In Early Spring, that'll appeal to you the most, right? So, does to me. So, I mean, that's important. So that's one of the things you want to do. And once on board, groups become program sponsors. So we did that first. We wanted everybody to want this. It's hard to change the culture top down. You need to work on it bottom up at neighborhood level. So you want to get everybody involved if you want to change the culture. It can't just be top down. And the top can organize it, but you need to have it going bottom up. The enforcement countermeasures begin with warnings to win support. And we use of police decoys, we do that. I train people how to do this. The use of flyers handed out to stop drivers to document the seriousness of the problem and asking them to become agents for change. And the use of sandwich board signs, we got rid of those later, and we used the construction type signs at the flagging sites. That's where the police officers pull you over to indicate why they're being pulled over. Because we learned early on they're giving the seatbelt salute to the police. You know, hey, I got my belt on. No, it's about pedestrians. Rapid rotation between sites, the use of standardized procedures that held up in court. They never throw our stuff out. By the way, if they throw our stuff out, when they get the citations, the police won't do it anymore. They won't write citations, they get thrown out. We started with those. That's from an application in Chicago. I was doing this in Chicago. But we started to go with these because these really can be broken down really small. And they're big signs. They're about this big. You can angle them a little bit, make sure if the flagging site is close. But the idea is they're not going to see them at the offense site, but they're going to see them when they're coming by and see all the stopped cars. We want them to see that while the cars are being stopped. So we have all these things, that the operational definition, they put out the cones, they use the signal timing formula, and we have a standard crossing protocol, and those are things you have to do to get and mitigate also against possible entrapment and all of that, so we do all of those things. And with multi-lane roads, we train the police officers to safely cross. We don't want them hit while they're doing the operations, or at any time actually. And of course, we like warnings because they allow more stops, and warning flyers help to sell the program, and warnings allow transition to no enforcement to enforcement of rules. One of the things that interested me about this is in New Jersey. It was the only place it worked this way. We had somebody who had a friend of theirs who was killed in a pedestrian crash. He would not give warnings, and we got blowback like you wouldn't believe as they went in and started enforcing something they'd never enforced before. They got a black eye because of that. I told them, don't do this, you're making a mistake. They said, no, the law is the law, and we're not going to hand out flyers either. There's no reason to justify what we're doing. Well, there is reason to justify what you're doing, because there's contempt for laws people don't believe in. That was the only study we did where we didn't get a good result. But I was only a consultant. They didn't have to take my advice. In Gainesville, we got them to sign a contract that they would do everything. And we had some nits of money for them, too, so that helped. Now, common excuses: I don't see the pedestrian. I didn't know I had to yield. I didn't know how to yield. Can you see this one? It's not very visible. You see that? That's a hand. He's telling Louis he's number one. You're number one, guy, as he blows by. Nice to know he got pulled over. Educational elements. Warnings distributed to residents just prior to beginning the wave. Earned media, large highway feedback signs, partnership between city agencies and city community partners. I'm going to show you some of this. The notice went out. Before it went out, we told people, hey, we're going to start enforcing this. But you can help by looking for pedestrians at crosswalk, yielding by stopping or slowing as required. Encourage others to do the same. Be a good model, yield, avoid a ticket, and help keep pedestrians safe. Modeling is really critical to everything we do. How many times do you see one person violates something, the next person does it, the person after that does it, the person, you see these strings of people. When one person doesn't yield, the other follow the leader. One person's running the light, the next one will go sometimes, and you'll see them following the leader. So all these things have to be considered. Got lots of earned media. This is interesting. This is a feedback sign. Gainesville drivers yielding to pedestrians last week. You don't start with this, because this is social norming. If the numbers are terrible, it works against you. You've got to start with good numbers. Actually, I ran a study with this. When I used this for speeding, I used it as part of Click It or Ticket in North Carolina. When we gave speeding information and we used a lenient versus a stringent criteria, we got better results when we used the lenient criteria for speeding than a stringent criteria, because we could post better numbers, and that yielded better performance. These got into the 80s eventually. These are always on busy roads. We wanted to make sure people would see these. I'm going to jump ahead to this slide here. I'm going to come back to these other slides. So you find it. Oh, come on. Oh, it's in the results section. We'll talk about that in a minute. Then I'll come back to that. All right. Yeah, here's where some of the data from lenient versus stringent criterion for the speed thing, showing there was some result there. The flyers, I always feature things like the 2 pedestrians hit. Injured on Mount Edward Road last year with children. I went to focus that, get support for what we're doing. And when I went with a warning program only, not citations, I was able to significantly reduce, these are weeks, to reduce speeding for long term, for years. And we used it with the feedback sign. We basically wiped out serious speeding, just really took it down to low levels. This is so many over, so many over, so many over. They're in kilometers per hour because this was Canada. But there's very, very impressive results there, actually. We did it in Israel and saw crash results as well as impressive results in using these procedures. That's in Hebrew. It's the same sign. In fact, I did this in Orange City. We had, in Orange City, every year they were having kids hit going to and from school. It's only 20,000 people. They called me in one year because 11 kids spread out were hit going to and from school. One was killed that year. 11 kids hit in 1 year. It just kept going in the newspaper. Another kid is hit. What do you think I found when I looked at Orange City? What might be missing in Orange City? Sidewalks. Okay. They're not going to be able to build sidewalks in one summer for the whole city. They weren't going to be able to do any. They had to get money. They had to deal with things. So you need to reduce speeding. Well, you know, unfortunately, the standard engineering solution won't work. What's the standard? There's an easy way to reduce speeding that everybody knows about. No, you increase the speed limit. And there's no speeding anymore. Or very little. But it doesn't help the kids. So there's a better way. What's the better way? The better way, I told the police, is I've done this years ago. That was that study I did on speeding many years ago, and I said, for some reason it never caught on, but it works. Trust me. You're going to call the community together. They're really outraged that they're hitting their kids. And so you're going to bring them into the schools, you're going to meet with them, and we're going to really enforce the speed limit, strictly enforce the speed limit when you people are going to and from school. I said, and you know what you're going to do? It's going to take days to produce the change, just days. You're going to get them when they're 2 and 3 miles an hour over the speed limit. You're going to pull them out. They'll throw it all out. Yeah, of course they will. You're going to warn. And you're going to give a flyer. And they did it. And they said, oh, but we'll be stacking them up along the road. You can have lots of police out because you are going to be stacking them up along the road while they're waiting for you to talk to them. I said, but you know something? After 2 or 3 days, every car is going to be a pace car every morning and every day when the kids are off school. And that's exactly what happened. And no kids were hit again. Right? That's all it took. I looked at what they were doing. They're rushing to drop kids off. They're rushing to get to work. And on a given day, one person's an egregious speeder, another day another person's an egregious speeder. And if you're just going to go after egregious speeders, you're going to be doing this for years before you're going to change the culture or change behavior. So what you have to do is you have to go in and you have to stop large numbers of people. And you know what surprised them? They said, Dr. Van Houten, I just don't understand this. We stop them, they're complimenting us. And they're saying, gee, I blew it. You know, hey, I was complaining about this, they're saying, and it's me. And they weren't saying I was only a few miles over the limit. They were saying, you know, what is a speed limit, by the way? Is it really a limit? Not if it's 10 or 15 miles over. So the public supported it. They stopped hitting their kids. They started to drive cautiously going to and from school. And so kids continued to do the erratic things that they tended to do, but they didn't hit them anymore. We also tried to put an education program for the kids, but I can't take credit for that because I don't guarantee results trying to educate kids about, including the high school kids, about how they should go to and from school. Of course, they still need to build sidewalks. I think they're doing it. I don't mean that they're not taking the advice. I mean, that's still an important part of a safe route. Some of the other things. Here. I even got an in-street sign there. I wanted to have a bigger in-street sign because I wanted to connect the in-street sign with the police officer, the motorman. You know, stop for me or stop for me kind of thing. That's more of a negative kind of thing, but this is a study I did for NHTSA. We did this in the original study, Louis and I, about 35 years ago. And so we said, if you have pedestrians signal their intention to cross, and we tried three things. You can just do this, you can do this, or you can do this. And here are results from various locations. And it's interesting. The higher the baseline yielding level, the better we got results going way up. The yielding was very poor, but we always got the same result. The least, but just stepping in, this, the red, and this is the green. And then you turn this into a wave if they yield and smile, because then they don't feel resentment. You want that. It's community. You want it to be community. Anyway, engineering, no passing from the dilemma zone to the crosswalk, use of advanced yield markings, but we did that before, and the use of the in-street signs. We started to put these in. The last phase of our study, we put the in-street signs in, and since then, they put the gateway in. They're getting even better results. So we're doing all those kinds of things. And they're using Quick Curve now, I think, too. They say it's working, but we'll see. So there's what they're doing now, putting more stuff in than they did before. And yielding for stage crossings at treated sites averaged 31.5% during baseline and 62% by the end of the study. Yielding for unstaged was 45%, but it went to 82% at the end of the study. That's natural crossings by actual people rather than our stage crossings. We tend to be a little more cautious with our stage crossings. And at the generalization sites, we also saw increases, and it went from 49% to 72.9, or about 73% at the places we never did any enforcement. And here's the end result in terms of looking at yielding over the course of the year at the treated sites. And also at the generalization sites, there's an increase. Most of these are staged, the better results for the natural crossings. And individual sites, site results, if they were already high, they stayed high, but the ones that weren't went up. And of course, there's time series and all that stuff, and regression and all that stuff. So those are all things that were done. So I guess I'll leave it open for some time for questions and see what you think.
We have a microphone for, obviously we are recording everything, and if we use the microphone, no one will hear your question. So
Yeah.
just raise your hand if you have a question or issue.
I think.
I can't hear you, actually.
Hello?
I don't think it's working.
It's just recording.
Perfect.
It's not-
Sounds good. Excellent.
Speak up.
I can do that. My name is Mackenzie Turner Bargan. I am a pedestrian planner with the City of Minneapolis. This year we're looking at implementing many of the things that you just went through in your presentation, so it was really exciting for me to have some numbers to back up the things that I'm proposing to pass along to our traffic operations supervisor. One question I had, so with the rectangular rapid flashing beacons, one of the questions, or some of the questions we're getting from our electricians, as well as others, is are these something that can be effective while mounted overhead rather than on a side post? And also, as far as the center median position goes, I've already received concerns regarding those posts getting taken out immediately by vehicles, plows, other things.
Yeah, where we did the study where a lot of those medians and refuge islands were put in, they were done in St. Pete where you don't have plows. So it depends, I guess, on how wide they are and how well, how they're constructed, how they're protected. I mean, those are engineering decisions that in regard to the question about overhead, we really don't know. There's been no real evaluation of the overhead. That came up at a pedestrian committee meeting at National Committee the other evening. There are some places trying it, but there's been no systematic evaluation of it. One of the advantages people think of having it at ground level is it's more eye level for the driver. But, you know, Who knows? I don't know, and I'm not prepared to say whether it will work or not. You're basically experimenting, right? You're the test pilot kind of on that if you're doing it, because we don't know what the effect is. The places that are doing overhead, many of them are combining two-side with an overhead. That's how they're doing it. That does make sense to me. They've got themselves covered here. There's data on this. I don't think this will do harm. I don't think it will. I think it probably will help, but I can't tell you that for sure, right? And of course, brightness, especially when you're looking up, is going to become key depending on the direction you're looking. We learned that a long time ago, and that can be a variable. Back plates and things like that may also be important. The size of it, don't know. So, I'm sorry I can't give you a better answer, but no one's researched it. Generally, though, it works pretty well as a treatment.
My name is Corey Festvog. I'm with the Minnesota Department of Transportation. I have a question regarding your opinion of marked versus unmarked crosswalks, because now that the weather's nicer, a couple times a week I'm getting calls about crosswalk striping, regardless of speed, number of lanes crossed, et cetera, et cetera.
You're raising a lot of very interesting questions. It's going to be a lengthy answer, I think, in part. Charlie Zagire's study, you're probably familiar with, looking at marked and unmarked crosswalks. If the ADT is not particularly high, it doesn't matter. If there's a median island or a refuge island, it doesn't much matter if you increase it up to a certain point, I think 15 or 16,000. Not that high. As ADT goes up, why does it become dangerous? Charlie figured out the same reason I figured out. This has to do with multiple threat crashes. So if you can reduce or mitigate against multiple threats, ADT should not be a reason for not putting something in. But what Charlie said was putting in the marks alone on a high ADT road could be dangerous if it's multi-lane. Not if it's not multi-lane, but if it's more than one lane in each direction, then probably it's not a great idea unless you put something else in, like an RFB or pedestrian hybrid beacon. Maybe that gateway, if it can survive. I'm still doing research on that. I don't know on the survival issue. But I can say this, that the advanced markings seem to mitigate greatly against those multiple threat crashes, which is what Charlie was picking up at those sites, those multi-lane sites. There were multiple threat crashes to a large extent. I think there's some work being done now on high visibility crosswalks. They're probably better because the transverse lines are often not seen and they wear out real fast. And you can set up your little blocks, the piano keyboard with the continental markings, so that the cars go between them. They'll last better that way from wear, friction. That's not about what plows can do to them, though, over the winter. That's a different issue when you've got a lot of plows running the road all the time. They scrape things, right, whether it's thermoplastic or paint. So those are issues. So the bottom line is lanes do matter. Obviously, pedestrian hybrid beacon, if people know what to do, can be very good in dealing with a lot of lanes. RFB seems to handle 4 lanes well. It may handle 6, especially if you can put something in the middle. And if it's wide enough in the middle, the plows aren't going to take it down. But if you have to make something narrow, yeah, there's a good chance they could. I don't know. No guarantee on that. Speed, it doesn't make sense to really have people walking in a crosswalk when you have what used to be old highway speeds. You know, these things work best in urban areas where speeds are 30 and 35 miles an hour. 25, 30, 35 miles an hour is where all of these interventions can work the best. When you start getting 40, 45, and 50 miles an hour, and I've seen crosswalks on roads at 55 an hour, and that used to be the interstate speed limit. So I have real concerns about that. Again, not a lot of data, but I don't think that's a good thing. Have people crossing roads with those kinds of speeds. So I don't know if I've answered your question. Maybe I raised some, but
Well, it's just a matter of explaining that to a resident, and then their next response is, well, you know, how can we deal with that? I mean,
yeah.
In a lot of these cases, it's either 2 lanes with turn lanes or 4 lanes, speeds 40 miles an hour or above.
Yeah.
With parks on one side, you've got pedestrian generators.
So then you might want to put in some of the new tools we have, an RFB or a pedestrian hybrid beacon at that site, and use advanced markings. So obviously, the hybrid beacon put stop bars in, and if it's if you have a stop law, you can do that for the RFB as well. Florida has a yield on, and they say says yield or stop, so we're putting stop bars in. So they've switched, putting in the yield markers. They're cheaper, easier to just put the stops in than putting the stop bars in now in Florida. So that's a possibility for you, going with those things. Are these suburban applications where you've got very quick roads, fast collect? These are arterials, and essentially.
Some of them are suburban areas, some of them are actually Highway 8 is
Yeah.
basically takes traffic from Wisconsin and moves it all the way over to Highway 35. That one comes up off.
I'll tell you a little story. It kind of relates to all this. It's somewhat. How I got on the National Committee. Why I decided to get on the National Committee. I'd done research on these advanced markings for a number of years, and they weren't getting into the people weren't putting them in. In one city, they'd done a lot of them. In another city, they didn't do them, and I wanted them to do it. And they had one. Well, first I want to tell you about a park. There was a place going across. That's what reminded me. People going back and forth to the park. They had one youth struck and killed there. A few years later, another youth was struck and killed there. Both were multiple threat crashes. They had a flashing yellow beacon there that's pedestrian activated. And it worked some. And people did yield, but there was a high ADT. Speeds weren't terribly high, but they were fast enough to kill. And they put in one there, the advanced markings. And they were there, as I was doing this research over the years, for 10 years, and nobody was hit again. And I went and said, you need to put these everywhere. And he said, we don't have any at all. They're not in the manual. I said, you have one by the park. And in a week, he ground it out. 4 months later, another young person was killed, about 12 years old, crossing the street there, multiple threat crash. Now, he's not a bad guy. I never thought that about him. He's trying to protect. A lot of people come up with half-baked ideas. They're not in the manual, and I can't just do anything anybody wants me to do. And I realized it was my responsibility to see they got in the manual. So I managed to get on the committee, and then I started to work hard at it, doing that, and helping other good ideas try to get on that were research-driven, because the committee wasn't always at that time research-oriented. It was more, my opinion, this is what we ought to do, and it started to become more and more data-oriented over the years, and it's very data-oriented nowadays, right? And I think more researchers got interested in being on it too, or helping, right? And there's a research committee there too, and so that helped. But the fact is that good ideas won't get used unless somebody champions them, and good things don't get done in the community unless you've got a champion to push them forward. The way it tends to be, it's always been that way, and we forget that. Naive academics think if I publish it, it'll get used. Right? And that's not necessarily the case. You can publish, and it won't necessarily get used. And some things get in real fast because people like them so much, like the countdown, so many went up. The only thing you could do is put them in the manual. Right? Because you got that kind of pressure. I want those countdown timers. So I had to people kept putting them up. Well, it turns out they do reduce crashes. It's nice. And people find them very helpful, right? And there's no resistance anymore. And then sometimes this gets to be a groundswell like the in-street. You ever seen the in-street markers? Well, they don't work as well as they did in the first community. In the first community, took all theirs out, it turns out. And that's beside the fact that when you mill the road and everything, right? These are a nightmare, right? And so sometimes things get in the manual, too. And they're not all that good, it turns out. So it can be, because they have a champion, but the data, and they do have some data, but there may be some problems with it. Yeah.
Well, and mine's not necessarily a question, it's more of just as a relation to everybody and research that's recently been done. I'm currently, and that's just finishing up actually in the next day or two, the Local Road Research Board in Minnesota has paid for a study to research and bring all this information together from Ziegler, some from Fitzpatrick, on the different treatments that are available out there, the different motorist yielding rates for each one of them, just an evaluation process, and bringing all that information together. That it will be published on the Local Road Research website and the LTAP website.
Yeah.
So that information is available. And then I guess relation to this study is, have you published any of those yield rates and everything else?
Oh, yeah, those are all published, but yeah. Those are published as well, and Charlie knows about all those.
Okay.
I'm on, Charlie has an NCHRP that I'm on that one. And it's looking at the crash modification factors that are associated with these treatments. We don't know that yet. All we know about is yielding and conflicts, surrogates, crash surrogates. And I'm not sure we're going to be able to completely answer that question because there aren't enough of them out there yet. People like to describe pedestrian crashes as random. I don't think they're random at all, but they are certainly sporadic. And so to be able to figure this out, we need a lot of sites. More than that, isn't just sites who say, okay, let's look at an RFB. Well, does the RFB have advanced markings or not? That may be an important mitigating variable. Is this an extra treatment? Yeah, it is. But in a way, you can look at those alone, you can look at the other alone, but do you have enough sites to be able to answer those questions? Does it matter how wide the road is? Does it matter how fast the road is? So you disaggregate the data when you start looking at those things, and your number of sites decreases. Your power in resolving crash changes gets more difficult. And then if you're using this empirical base, which I always have a lot of problems with the empirical base, sometimes I see, hey, crashes going up, but they really went down. And they say that. Well, that depends on how valid the way you picked those control sites was. And, it's very complicated. And I'm not sure I fully understand that because at TRB, when I send papers out, I get different experts giving me different opinions about, experts on empirical base on a particular result, which suggests to me there's a lack of maturity still in what we know about how to evaluate crashes using empirical base. I'm going to say that because that's a concern I've had right from the very beginning. And I feel much more comfortable when there's crash reductions, plus when you look at everything, it all works out when you do the math as well with your comparisons that you've picked.
Yeah, and then just as a with that research that we did collect video at different sites. The University of Minnesota collected some of that data. So if you guys, I'll give you my business card after this, but
sure.
If you guys are interested in that data. Oh, sorry, Brian Nemeth with Bolton and Menk, was the prime researcher for that study, but then the University of Minnesota also collected data for that. So.
Good.
Brad Ostoshin with, I'm the safety engineer at MnDOT. Found some of your results interesting, but it seemed to me that there was a lot of value in doing widespread deployments of these in a close proximity versus isolations of various treatments. Is that a correct interpretation of what you talked about today?
Particularly when something's new, people are unfamiliar. If they're unfamiliar with something, what do I do here? And you can see that with the hybrid beacon to a large extent. It wasn't as intuitive as people thought it was. That's not to say that you're not going to be able to get the good results everywhere eventually, but it's going to involve some education, maybe even some enforcement. And I think those things are key to having a good plan. We did, in the Michigan site, we actually looked at, there were some differences in how much outreach they had done between several communities who had used a few of them only. And compliance was much higher at, and we did the survey as well, and understanding was much greater at the one where they had good outreach efforts. And the ones that had none, compliance was poor and understanding was poor, which is what you'd expect, right? So sometimes you see this and you say, oh, well, it worked in the literature, and if I just put one up, I'm going to get the same result, and you might not get them. As they used to say on those ads on TV, results may vary, but sometimes they also vary for other reasons, because you're using this generically, and your site may differ in some significant way from some of the sites they were looking at, and that may be an important variable in terms of the efficacy of that particular treatment. We don't know everything, right? There's always more research to be done. Researchers love to say that because, research generates more research, which generates more funding, which enables researchers to do more research, and this is what they like to do.
So as a follow-up to that as well, there's some resistance in some communities because they have a lot of, I'll say, external visitors not local to the area. Did you find anything with any of your studies that would indicate that, influx of people from outside of the region have a positive or negative influence from that?
Depends on where they come from. Literally, I mean, if they come from a place where people do a lot of yielding, they'll initially be more inclined to yield. They come to a place where there's very little to a place where they do. But I think it's the norm that you see, unless almost everybody's a tourist, it usually isn't the case. If the people locally are doing something, others will tend to follow the leader. They'll tend to do what the locals are doing to a large extent. And they'll pick it up after a while. What do I do here? Well, that's what everybody else is doing, so that's what I do. And if everybody else is going through, you go, oh, that's what you do. You go through. So they're just going to follow what other people. If I don't know what to do, I look and see what other people are doing. And
okay, my name is Doug Goodman from Marshall, Minnesota. With me is Carol Martin here. We're down in the southwest corner, for those of you who don't know where Marshall is, population of about 15,000, university community. We're somewhat unique in the fact that there are 3 major highways that come and intersect right in our community. So we've got outside traffic coming in along with an increased emphasis on pedestrian safety, bicycle trails, everything there. A couple of things that I noticed, but I wanted to ask you about. I'm seeing some more advertisements on these signs for pedestrian crossings that are the flashing lights around the perimeter of the sign versus the beacons going back and forth. Have you seen those? Are those
I have
any
seen them.
value?
I saw one last week at a particular site. I have not seen a research study on those.
They're push button.
They're push
and we're
button.
seeing more stop signs with the flashing solar-powered.
I just saw a demonstration of some of those at the research committee meeting too. Yeah, you're seeing more of those. Some of them have a light thing that goes through. It's reflective during the day, but then there's the light at night. Some of these, the light at day, you see those LEDs around some of these yield signs, pedestrian signs during the day. I know exactly what you're talking about. Probably came from the same vendor. But I don't know of any data on it. And when I don't know of any data, I am not prepared to say very much about it at all. So,
Well, and then I'll even flip it to the other side in our research, and Carol was a major part of this, and I believe it's Wisconsin. They do something as simple as they will put a bucket on one side of the intersection and a bucket on the other, and put about 6 or 7 red flags in it, stick flags, so that when you come to that, you wave your flag as you cross the intersection and then put it in the bucket on the other end. And it's pretty simple, but is it effective?
Louis Malafont, who this person I talked about originally, did that work with me, when he did his review for his dissertation, found that in Japan. That's where that came from originally. The Japanese were using the flags. One thing I'll probably say, in Japan, probably the flags don't disappear. And what you can have, here's some problems. They may start to collect on one side, and then you don't have any on this side anymore, even if they don't disappear. There can be low cost, and you can put out new flags all the time, but nobody wants to go around. It's like the in-street signs. Even if they're inexpensive, you don't want to be replacing them, and you don't want to be going out and replenishing flags. One of the things we found was, and Louis' idea actually, why don't you just signal your intention? He saw this in the literature. And signal your intention you want to cross. And I think it works almost as well as a flag. And hey, it's with you all the time, right? So if we train people to do that, we had a little sign that indicated, how to cross the street. And actually people were starting to do it. We had a percentage who did it, and when they did it, they got higher yielding. And we ran a couple of studies where we compared, like the NHTSA study, whether you extend the arm or you don't. So if you have reasonable yielding, 30, 40%, it may go up to 70, 80% of people are clear about their intention to cross. Sometimes there's ambiguity. Does that person want to cross? Is that person waiting for me to go through first? When you do that, you're indicating, hey, I want to cross. And we also tell them to wave and thank and smile. Because that really does help to keep people courteous within the community and working together, right? Being part, we're one. And you want that to happen. Oh, that slide I didn't show you. I went through it, blew through it. Remember that sign, that feedback sign? During baseline, only about 8% of the people saw the sign before it was put up. That's why you have to ask that question, right? You always have people who see whatever it was before it was actually installed. You need to know that. That's your baseline. But it's about 80% in the 80s or something. Toward the end of the study, everybody had seen that sign as the waves. And when it went up and with the waves, the numbers go right up. So we put the signs in the right places. But I thought it was always cute that there's always people who see it before you put it up. That's why you have to have that question in the before.
Hi, Matt Jersbick with WSB and Associates. I guess, have you looked into the effectiveness at all of the in-pavement LEDs?
Yeah, I looked at it in
Crosswalks?
Florida, and Charlie Zaguer looked at them. Some other people looked at them in Florida. We're not able to replicate the effects that they had in the original California city and all those places. A lot of it has to do with lighting, sunlight, how bright the lights are, and whether they're really very salient to people. And so, again, results may vary, but the results haven't been as good, and people are looking at these top things better because you're not having to put stuff in the roadway and then having to try to service stuff in the roadway, which has been a big problem. But they haven't been as efficacious as people thought they were initially. It was like a real, at the beginning, oh, this is a novel idea. And, but the first city wasn't happy with the results, with their in long-term results, and they did take them out. I remember contacting them when I was looking into it some time back, and then Charlie and others have collected data. I looked at a few sites with them and found we weren't getting, there was some effect, but it wasn't nearly as big as we had hoped it would be. I think they may come out of the manual ultimately, because there's so many problems with them, and there's so many alternatives now that are better choices, but you're not seeing many of them going in anymore.
Melissa Barnes, the Minnesota Department of Transportation. What I'm wondering about is we're a stop for pedestrians state, and I've looked at putting the advanced stop bar lines before crosswalks, but when they're at intersections, one of my biggest concerns is that the cars think that it's an all-way stop when it's a side street stop. Did you see anything with that or do any research on that at all?
Well, we did them at those sites, and we used the yield markings in that later study. So it's a little harder. I guess they'd be less likely to. I think you have to be careful about where you place them, and place them systematically and judiciously. And in some cases, they're placing them on the approach. Sometimes you'll have two crosswalks. I'd rather there's one. But if you have a driveway or if you have a street, you know, they're obviously going to have to go on the other side. Yeah. And but no, I don't know. We haven't seen any. When we did our original study, we didn't see any problems of that sort.
And that was with the stop bars?
Yeah, that was the yield markings. We did some with the stop bars earlier on. So we don't have I don't have enough of a database with the stop bars alone. So I should really say that.
Okay.
Okay. The other, I know Florida's doing them, and I could check and see what their experience has been. That would be a good thing, be easy to do, and just look at some of the crash history at some of the sites. I think that would be helpful. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
My name is Brenda Himrick, and I work for Metro Transit. I'm the manager of bus system safety there. Mm-hmm. And one of our problems is we have a counterflow lane. So we have a street that's one way, but the buses run in the opposite direction. So if I were a pedestrian and I have to first cross a bus that's coming from my left, not my right, that's the closest lane of traffic, and everybody's looking at the one way and they're looking the opposite direction. And I mean, when we started that, we had the buses were stopping and honking at every crosswalk when we first started. Mm-hmm. And the speed limit was really low. And now we're operating it, and there are issues, especially if people want to run across the street and catch a bus on the other side,
yeah, they're a greater risk when
would
they're
this
doing
be
that.
a good place to use the street markings to look both ways?
It's very low cost and an easy thing to do, sure.
Okay,
I mean,
because I've been
no
trying to
harm
push
to-
that with the city of Minneapolis on 4th Street between Park and Portland and 1st Street. She's writing it down. Thank you.
Yeah. Actually, it turns out the manual's pretty open about things that you think could be a safety message you have to give people. It's very open. There's a whole provision in there where you can do that, as long as you're not using a symbol. Right?
Ah.
So if you use text, you're fine.
Okay.
Then if the symbol has to be approved and all of that, right, then you need to go through the procedures, right, especially if it's not a sign that's in the manual. But there's a whole provision there for signs, and that could be markings, too, just with those kinds of safety messages.
Yeah, we have
You can do those at your, where judgment is there that that's an important message to convey. You can do so.
Okay.
They don't want to have to just approve every possible message you might have to put out there, right? So
That makes sense.
yeah.
Hi, my name is Emily Becky, and I live in Edina, Minnesota. I'm a pedestrian myself, and I also volunteer on the Edina Transportation Commission. We're trying to get an educational program going, and the first most obvious place that we thought to start is like a curriculum in the schools. I just had a gut feeling, because I work in a public school, that kids weren't necessarily the right, not that they're a bad group of people to teach pedestrian safety to, but that we really need to target the drivers. And I'm just wondering, how you mentioned that, it should start from the neighborhoods. And I feel like I have been trying to do that from like a neighborhood level, and it's really, really hard. Do you have any suggestions, or how do you begin, and how do you educate drivers? I think there's a lot of ambiguity in Edina about we don't have sidewalks everywhere. People don't understand the crosswalks, they don't understand the beacons, and they don't understand the signs. So sometimes you'll get people stopped on one side and cars blowing through on the other side, and it's scary.
Permission to do these very regularly. One of the things that's helped in some of the communities for the hybrid beacon is some additional signage that explains it. Some of it's done pretty intuitive, and different agencies are looking at that right now, and they say they're getting pretty good results with it. So you can look on the websites and find out what's out there. That helps. When it was a university community, there were two university communities I was comparing in that other study, and one university community had a great outreach. It's easier to do in the university community to do an outreach than it is maybe with some other communities. So one university community did the outreach, the other didn't, and they were in their areas, and they were much better compliance with the one that did the outreach to their students and faculty and so on, because they're a good part of the population in the university community. So in Gainesville, we looked at neighborhood associations. We got everybody we could find that we wanted to be able to reach to get this message out to. Obviously, we went to UF because they're big university, but we also had other partners. We tried to get other kinds of community partners. So we had lots of people coming, and then we got stuff through the schools, information to the parents as well as to the kids through the school thing. We did that. Every way we could to reach them, we tried to do, just like we did in Orange City. How do you get to everybody in your community? And it's not going to be the same for every community. Some communities have routes that others don't that work real well. So you need to find out, how do you get the word out in this community? Who's best at doing that? What are some of the groups? So it's a little bit of work to do it, but it pays off nicely because getting their support and buy-in is really important. It's a lot easier when you have buy-in to the thing to work than to try to push back after you've done something and you've got people now opposing what you're doing, and now you're having to try to fix it. It's a lot easier to do the work proactively rather than reactively, right? So, it wasn't a big part in terms of the time of the project, but there was some effort involved, and we had some good partners who helped us, who knew their own community. Obviously, said, this is what we want to do. Who do we need to talk to? And got them working together, thinking about that, and coming up with a solution for us. But I've always found that to be important. You want buy-in from the community as much as you possibly can get buy-in. If they're going to they start digging their heels in and they start complaining. It doesn't take much in the beginning. The mayors get calls, the police chief gets calls, and they're negative calls. What's going on, right? So you don't want that. You want positive calls. You want to know there's so much support that when you get a negative call, they're willing to speak up and say, wait a minute here. This is what we're doing in our community, and you need to get behind it, right? And you need them to say that. They're not going to say that unless people are behind it, right? So they're sticking their neck out at that point, right? They don't want to do that. Politicians don't want to do that. And some police chiefs don't either.
Let me ask one question myself. I'm going to wait for the mic.
Okay.
You talked about pedestrian safety during the last hour and a half. Do you have any comments about bicycle safety? Is there anything that you've learned over the years from the pedestrian side that would apply to the bicyclists and the safety of that bicyclists on the road?
Yeah, I mean, there are many of the same issues. I mean, screenings, for example, screening crashes are really big. Your right hook, left hook often involve screening, and there's serious crashes for bicyclists. And we probably need to work harder in engineering countermeasures. And right now we're looking at a whole bunch of them. NACTO's got a whole bunch of them going that we're looking at. But sometimes there's not a lot of data behind all of them either. We need to worry about that. Is it, are we doing good? You get a lot of enthusiasm behind things like cycle tracks or something. And they say, well, they're using them in Denmark. But look at the crash histories in Denmark. And we've got now vehicles coming out from hidden areas where there are conflict points. How do we mitigate against that? You want to do these. I can see how they protect against one thing, but what are you going to do about this? So I don't know. We have a lot more work to do, I think, in the Bicycle Technical Committee, at the National Committee, finding good solutions to make it, one, safe, two, feel safe, because we want people to do it. And whether it's safe or not is one thing, but they should also feel safe. We don't want them to feel safe and not be safe. We certainly want them to feel safe, even though it is safe. And so there are some of the same issues. And getting community support behind cycling, and there are a lot of communities, things are changing, and the culture is changing already. We might want to do more culture change kinds of things as well to back up what we're trying to do, because for a while I think there was almost a bicycles don't belong on the road kind of attitude. And there was a phase where there was a lot of negative things going on between motorists and bicyclists. And I think that's changed. I think there's been a lot of mitigation in that area. And, but I think they share the same problem pedestrians share. Pedestrians are pretty safe in New York when everybody's crossing, and you know, it's kind of frustrating for the drivers. It's a wall of people. But when your pedestrian is rare, sometimes that's where some of your worst crashes are happening, because no one's looking. And the same is true of the bicycle when they're rare, and the same is true of the motorcycle when they're rare, is that you look but don't see. You see what you look for from a human factors point of view. So it's a chicken and egg kind of thing, but it'll probably help bicycle safety if more people bike. Say, well, there can be more crashes, but per exposure it may actually go down, right? So, but they are vulnerable road users. It's another good point of contact, and so probably a similar type of a plan that's multifaceted is going to be needed in order to solve the problem. I don't think any one tool alone is going to solve the problem.
Well, if there are no more questions, let's just thank our speaker. People who came here today liked what they heard and want more of the same. Bring in other speakers on similar topics. Could you drop your card off, for example, or we could put a sign-up sheet. Stephanie in the back will have a sign-up sheet. Put your name, contact information, affiliation down, and we will basically get back to you when we have additional seminars like this in the future. And if there's anything you're looking for, let us know, and we'll see what we can do to accommodate.
You're taping this.
Yes.
Is there a possibility of acquiring?
It will be on the web. We will basically post it on the Roadway Safety Institute website. And I don't know how long it will take. It'll probably be 2 weeks from now. It will be posted.
And Ron also mentions the manual.
That's the manual, MUTCD. That's the Uniform Manual for Traffic Control Devices. There's a national committee where they vet all the different signs that you see on the road, and that's what the manual is. So you can Google search, and you can probably download the whole manual if you want. Thank you all for coming.